Stoneshard is a difficult game. It can be really hard to get used to if you don't know what you're doing, and you're probably gonna die. A lot. Just from reading reviews, I know that a lot of people have trouble even with the first contract, so I decided to make this video a bit more comprehensive than my last tips and tricks video. This is my guide on how to beat your first contract in Stoneshard. I hope you enjoy. So the first thing we're gonna do is go through my process of making a new character and how to gear up at first. Right away we'll talk to Varen about his ring and we'll grab that. It's free stats, so why not? Now we're gonna run into the town for the rest of our gear. In my opinion, the most important things to grab are a splint and some extra healing salves. They're really cheap and make it so you can treat your injuries at any time. It's a lifesaver. Literally. Now, I recommend running to the blacksmith to grab some bear traps and some caltrops. These are great to use at choke points, especially if you're playing a ranged build. I also recommend buying some lockpicks from the blacksmith. You'll probably need them. To go even one step further, if the trapper is an Osbrook, you could potentially buy a throwing net from him. These things are amazing if you're playing ranged. Even if you're not ranged, you could still use this to separate enemies from each other and make your 2v1 into a 1v1. I also recommend checking out the tailor to see if he has any cheap gear to fill in your empty slots. I have a bad habit of resting too much, so I also like to buy some extra food. You can get it for really cheap from the farmer, right next to Osbrook. Lastly, I recommend checking the merchants to see if anyone has a second water skin. They're really cheap and it'll make it so you virtually never have to worry about water while you're exploring. Now, we're going to talk to the village elder Odar and pick up our contract. This will make it show up on our map when we click the M key. Lastly, before you go out and explore, I highly recommend paying 15 coins to stay at the inn for a night. You don't even have to sleep the whole night, all you have to sleep is an hour to save, but if you want to sleep for a night, you'll end up getting a rest bonus, which will give you more XP. Now, if we're confident, we can either head straight to the dungeon, or we can take a day or two to grind out some bandits and level up. Just keep in mind that if you already picked up the contract, it has a time limit that you can see in your quest menu. Leveling up means you get an action point and a skill point, which makes you stronger and potentially lets you use a new skill. This can be a game changer in the early game. This guide isn't focusing on a specific build, so I'm not going to tell you what to put your action points into. What I will recommend though is Leg Sweep, Seize the Initiative, and Warcry work very well on almost any builds. I also recommend using a shield early on because it just massively helps with survivability. You can also ask around for rumors to see if there's any campsites nearby. If there's one near the dungeon, you can clear it out and then you have a save spot that's even closer. Now, I think we're ready to take on the dungeon. Once you're inside, the Examine Surroundings button is your best friend. I highly recommend getting into the habit of using it before every room when you can see into it for the first time. You'll die if you don't. Trust me, I learned from experience. The good thing about these traps though is you can actually use them to your advantage. Enemies typically walk towards you using the shortest available route, which means that you can guide them into the traps. If it's a tile trap, I recommend staying a little bit back, just in case it's a poison trap. But spike traps are your best friend. You can even cheese the boss by baiting him into the spike traps and he'll die pretty fast. I recommend breaking down doors by clicking control and entering combat mode to whack them instead of having to right click them over and over. Save your lockpicks for the chests, because if you don't have one and you break the chests, you're probably not going to get anything. You can also cheese the boss and other enemies by bringing them back to the entrance of the dungeon. If you stand next to the door, they'll come to you. You can fight until you take some damage, and then you can leave the dungeon and rest until you're healed up again. Then you can go back in. By constantly repeating this, you'll minimize your damage taken and most likely be able to kill the boss earlier than you should have been able to. If you want to take it one step further, you can even save scum by making an exit save outside of the dungeon and then going into your files and making a copy of it somewhere else. Then you can always drag it back in after the game deletes it. I'm not going to go too in depth on this, but there's a Steam guide that'll link. Once you finish your contract, saving whoever needs to be saved or picking up whatever item you need, you can head back to Osbrook. Just be careful in case of wildlife or any bandits. It's no fun to die after you already beat the dungeon. Well, now you completed your first contract and you're well on your way to becoming a better Stoneshard player. If you're wondering how my game is running at 5 times speed or need any other tips for the game, I recommend checking out my other Stoneshard tips and tricks video. I'm sure there's some overlap between these two videos, but I think that one's pretty useful too. Either way, I hope you enjoyed my video. If you watched to the end, thank you so much. I highly appreciate clicking the like or subscribe button. It means a lot to me. Thank you for your support. This is Bryce, signing off. I hope you have a wonderful night.